Introduction to the Book of Habakkuk. The Book of Habakkuk was written as a result of important events that took place in Judah. These events begin in 625 BC, when the new Babylonian Empire appeared under the reign of Nabopolassar, the father of Nebuchadnezzar the king. The Babylonian Empire continued to strengthen until it was able in 612 BC, to achieve a valuable victory over Nineveh, the capital of Assyria. At the same time in the land of Judah, an important event took place in 609 BC, which is the death of Josiah, the pious king, and the evil king Jehoiakim began his reign. He is the king who persecuted the prophet Jeremiah, and burned the holy book written by him in fire. Since this date, the decline of Judah began, whether moral or spiritual, in contrast to those good days of King Josiah. In 606 BC, the famous Battle of Carchemish took place, in which Babylon was victorious over Egypt and what was left of Assyria. So, Babylon became the superpower in the region. In the same year Babylon continued its victories, and was able to defeat Judah, and this is the beginning of the first wave of captivity. In 597 BC the second wave of captivity took place, in which Jehoiakim was taken to the king of Babylon. He was the son of Jehoiakim, who had died only 3 months ago, which means that Jehoiakim's reign lasted for only 3 months. In 586 BC, the third and final wave of captivity took place, in which Zedekiah, the last king of Judah, was taken in captivity. From the dates mentioned above, we can determine the time of writing the Book of Habakkuk. As Habakkuk complained of injustice and corruption, this clarifies that he is speaking in a time after King Josiah, and before the Babylonian captivity, since no punishment from God had occurred yet. So we can conclude that the beginning of writing the Book of Habakkuk is in 609 BC. However, Habakkuk mentioned details of Babylon's corruption and injustice in his second complaint. This indicates that the time of the end of the writing of the Book of Habakkuk may reach as late as 597 BC. Thus, the Book of Habakkuk was written over periods of time. Habakkuk used to go with his questions to the Lord, and return with revelations or answers to his questions. The Bible did not mention any information about the personality of Habakkuk, and in that, Habakkuk is similar to 2 other minor prophets. The Bible did not mention any information about them, they are Obadiah and Malachi. But we can deduce information about Habakkuk from his book. The first is that he is a prophet. This was mentioned explicitly in Habakkuk chapter 1 verse 1. The pronouncement that the prophet Habakkuk perceived. And from the way he wrote the book, especially chapter 3, we can also conclude that he is a poet, because the 3rd chapter was written in Hebrew in a poetic manner, similar to a psalm. And if we look at the features of the book, we will find it different from any other prophetic book. Because it is usual that God begins by addressing the prophet with a prophecy, who in turn deliver it to the people. But in the book of Habakkuk, we see Habakkuk, he is the one who started and went to God, in order to receive from him the answer and the revelation. And he conveyed then the revelation to the people, so that they might be assured in their humiliation. Thus, we see that the name of Habakkuk is in agreement with his service. The meaning of Habakkuk is hug or embrace. Martin Luther commented beautifully on the name and said, "It was as though Habakkuk was hugging and embracing his people with his prophecy, to calm and comfort them." We see in this book different types of literature. It includes a dialogue part, between Habakkuk and God, and a poetic part, similar to the Psalms in its composition. We can summarize the book of Habakkuk in 6 main points. The first point: Habakkuk's complaint to God, about the injustice that has no reckoning or punishment. The second: God answers Habakkuk's complaints, and informs him that he will inflict severe punishment on his people through Babylon. The third: Habakkuk returns to complain again, but this time about the injustice his people were subjected to, from Babylon. Here, the first chapter ends. And as we turn to the second chapter, we see the fourth point: God is clarifying his judgment on Babylon. And in the third chapter, Habakkuk remembers God's intervention in favor of his people in the old days, and this makes him end the book with a song of victory, despite the difficult circumstances. And after we roughly have an idea of the book outlines, let's look at the main theme of the book. It is revolving around a main idea. Where is God from evil and pain? Why does God not punish the evil, and save the righteous? And this brings us to the problem of evil. One of the main reasons that increases evil, is what the Ecclesiastes said: whenever a sentence for a crime is not carried out swiftly, the human mind becomes determined to commit evil. This prompted some to go far and say that, the Lord will do neither good, nor evil. This problem has baffled many a Bible writers before, like Job, Asaph and Jeremiah. That is why Job asks, and he is amazed, why do the wicked live? Increase in power and wealth too. Asaph says, for I was envious of the proud, when I observed the prosperity of the wicked. And Jeremiah asks, why does the way of the wicked prosper? And for God to answer Habakkuk, and solve this problem for him, God focuses on 2 points. The first is waiting. Habakkuk had to wait for an answer from God. Wait for a declaration that would explain to him God's response from evil, instead of drawing wrong conclusions. The fact that God does not answer immediately, does not mean that he approves of evil. But Habakkuk also had to wait for the fulfillment of what God had answered. This is what God said to Habakkuk: though it delays, wait for it. Then he gives him the key verse of the book: the righteous shall live by his faith. There is no substitute for faith that can withstand scenes of evil and injustice. For faith believes that God will answer and will fulfill what he answered. The second point is the judgment. God does not approve of evil. Just because he is slow, does not mean that he is neglecting. For every evil must be punished. God declares that he would punish Judah for their wickedness. And the punishment will be so severe that you will not believe, though it be told you. For no one would imagine that God could cause his people to be subjected to captivity. But he also spoke of judgment on Babylon. This is in response to Habakkuk's second complaint. So God spoke of 5 woes directed at Babylon. As the Bible is full of acts of care and mercy for all creation, he also often talks about the judgment. This is what people try to forget or ignore. To collect the most common books that spoke about the judgment, to differentiate them from each other, we start by judgment on Judas. This is what Habakkuk spoke of. In addition to the prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Zephaniah, they all spoke of the destruction of Judah. On Babylon, which carried out the captivity of the southern kingdom, it is also subjected to a judgment, which was announced by Habakkuk and Jeremiah. On Assyria, which enslaved the northern kingdom, we will find Isaiah and Nahum talking about their judgment. And finally, Edom, we find Isaiah, Jeremiah and Obadiah proclaiming its destruction. And because Habakkuk lived in a difficult period, in which evil abounded, this prompted God to send many prophets, as he is trying with man to turn him back from evil. Habakkuk was a contemporary of many prophets like Zephaniah and Nahum from the minor prophets. He also was a contemporary of Jeremiah, Ezekiel and Daniel, among the major prophets. The Book of Habakkuk is divided into 3 chapters. The topic of the first chapter is the Chaldean invasion. Chapter 2, the judgment on Babylon. Chapter 3, Habakkuk final victory. In chapter 1, we find Habakkuk crying out. In chapter 2 we find him understanding. And in chapter 3 he is praising. In chapter 1, we see Habakkuk is fallen. In chapter 2 we see him standing. In chapter 3 we see him walking on his heights. In chapter 1, we find Habakkuk puzzled. In chapter 2, waiting. And in chapter 3, confident. Thus, we find that the book, which began with crying and shouting, ended with victory and praising.